Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai ki te whare tawahi a mahi e Aotearoa ko Hamish McDougall aho. Greetings everybody, it's my great pleasure as Executive Director of the New Zealand Institute of International Affairs to welcome you this evening. A special welcome to our special guest, David McAllister MEP, Your Excellencies, Heads of Mission, members of the New Zealand Institute of International Affairs, including the Wellington branch committee members and all other attendees. I bid you a very warm welcome. Nau mai, haere mai. I'd like to commend you all for showing some exemplary confidence this evening in the ability of the football ferns to progress to the playoffs, meaning you don't need to attend the match at the stadium this evening. We're especially thankful for you for coming along, because we know there's a lot on, including a careers expo outside. So if you're in the market for a job, then maybe you could get that at the same time. But thank you all so much for coming along. But more seriously, I think we've got a really important and stimulating hour or so of discussion ahead of us, looking at development, trade and security in the Pacific. And all of these three areas are obviously of considerable importance to us here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, as well as the broader region. Before I move on, I was hoping just to make a plug for a couple of events we've got coming up. Next Thursday, 3rd of August, we're having a pre-election debate. The Foreign Affairs spokespeople from all the parliamentary parties are having a debate moderated by Josie Pagani here in Wellington. So you're obviously more than welcome to come along to that, which we think will be a landmark, hopefully, in the election campaign. And then on the 8th of August, we've got the Swiss Foreign Minister talking at the New Zealand Institute of International Affairs Wellington branch. And then Bruce Wilson on the 21st of August is a professor from RMIT in Australia, again, an expert on European Union matters. So I think the calibre, the very high calibre of speakers, particularly from Europe at the moment, kind of reflects the considerable interest in our part of the world. It seems especially timely and an honour, of course, to welcome David McAllister MEP along this evening to talk to us. Because the ink is, of course, barely dry on the New Zealand Free Trade Agreement, and one of the few remaining hurdles for that is ratification by the European Parliament. So we may hear a little bit about that later. And of course, New Zealand has signed up to the Horizon Europe Research and Innovation Program, the first sort of geographically distant country to do so. So there is plentiful evidence and collaboration, not only with New Zealand, but with some of our near neighbours in the Pacific. So obviously it's great to welcome David here, not only because he is a fellow person with a very Scottish sounding name, but I was reading that his father is from Glasgow, but David was actually born in Berlin and lived there in the north of Germany, where he has pursued both a legal career and also a stellar political career, including in the European Parliament since 2014. But prior to this, he was the Prime Minister of Lower Saxony, representing the Christian Democratic Union, CDU party. And he's the current chair of the Committee of Foreign Affairs in the European Parliament, substitute member of the Committee of International Trade, and on the subcommittee on Security and Defence, and is vice president of the European People's Party. So just to make you aware of the format, David is going to talk for about 20 minutes, and then we'll break into a Q&A. So I really hope you put your thinking caps on and come up with some excellent and robust questions, and we'll have a good discussion. And then Her Excellency Nina Obermeyer, the EU Ambassador to the European Union, is going to say a few words at the conclusion and a vote of thanks. And if I can just preempt the vote of thanks slightly, I'd especially like to thank the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. We've got Bertel Wenger, the Director for Australia, New Zealand, Pacific here, not least for contributing to the catering this evening. So thank you very much, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. But I would like to welcome David McAllister. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, first of all, for the warm welcome, and I'm delighted to be here. And I would also, first of all, thank you for the kind invitation that I'm allowed to address this audience. I would like to thank the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, who has made this trip possible for me to visit New Zealand and afterwards Fiji and Tonga. And I'm also delighted that our EU Ambassador, Nina Obermeier, is with us tonight. So it's a real pleasure to address you tonight, especially even more so now because the bilateral relations between New Zealand and the European Union have received a major political push. It was just mentioned, not only has New Zealand now officially been associated to Horizon Europe, the European Union's research and innovation program, but also that on the 9th of July, New Zealand Prime Minister Chris Hipkins and EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen finally signed the free trade agreement between New Zealand and the European Union. This follows 4 years and 12 individual rounds of negotiations and reaffirms once again the long-standing partnership between New Zealand and the European Union. And I would like to commend both teams for the enormous efforts they have made. This is a good agreement and it's beneficial for both sides. New Zealand and the European Union have thus set a positive example and laid an important foundation for fair, rules-based and sustainable trade, and all of this at a time when protectionism is on the rise and the world is witnessing the return to power politics. Since the 24th of February last year, the day the Russian Federation started a fully fledged invasion of Ukraine, New Zealand has shown to be an important and true ally for us in Europe. You have firmly stood by our side in launching a barrage of sanctions that are having a devastating impact on the Russian economy, in mobilizing enormous additional funding for Ukraine, and in delivering equipment to a country under attack. And we cannot thank New Zealand and many other of our partners for this solidarity. In his imperial obsession, Mr. Putin has broken international law, challenged borders, and committed land theft. This war waged by the Russian Federation is not simply an act of aggression by the largest country in Europe in terms of size against the second largest country in Europe, but also a brutal, a violent, a frontal attack on the entire international rules-based order. Institutions that have previously shaped the European peace and stability architecture and which have always provided a forum for dialogue with the Russian Federation have simply become dysfunctional. The Kremlin no longer accepts the basic principles of the European security order that were established after 1990 and which all sides have recognized several times in treaties. That means the importance of sovereignty and territorial integrity, the prohibition of the use of force, and the inviolability of state borders. And the big challenge for us in the European Union with our 27 member states, but also for our non-EU democratic partners in Europe will be how to deal with the Russian Federation as long as a war criminal is sitting in the Kremlin. The European Union's immediate neighborhood will dominate our common foreign and security policy agenda in Europe for some time to come, not least in response to the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. Yet, if anything, the war signifies that the European Union and our 27 member states cannot afford to neglect broader geopolitical currents, not least the ones in the Pacific, a region that has become a center of geopolitical gravity and a rallying point for multiple global players. Indeed, China has been extremely active in the past 20 years, constructing artificial land and building military facilities. And you, just like we in Europe, witnessed that on the 17th of June last year, the People's Republic officially launched its third aircraft carrier, the Fujian as part of an ongoing effort to modernize the People's Liberation Army into a force rivaling the US military by 2027. There is no doubt that China's foreign policy has become more aggressive and coercive in challenging the boundaries of its neighbors' territorial waters and undermining already stretched democratic institutions in the Pacific. Because China has changed, we have to change our policy towards China. In reaction to the Chinese expansion in this region here, Australia announced its Pacific setup in 2016, while the United States committed to re-engagement via its free and open Indo-Pacific strategy in 2017. Others have followed suit, EU and New Zealand in 2018 with the Pacific Reset, as well as Japan with its respective Indo-Pacific strategy that was backed up by opening embassies in Vanuatu and Kiribati. India unveiled a 12-point plan to strengthen ties with the Pacific nations in 2018, and 1 year later, the United Kingdom also announced its, quote, Pacific uplift, unquote. So it was also time for us in the European Union to take action. Spurred by national strategies of 3 of our member states, France, Germany, and the Netherlands, and encouraged by New Zealand, which has persistently called for more engagement with Pacific Island states amid China's concerted push to increase its clout in the region, the European Union as a collective also acknowledged the necessity to reinforce its presence in the region. In February 2021, a ministerial forum was held in Paris, bringing together over 60 foreign ministers from European and Pacific Island countries, and in September 2021, the European Commission, together with the European External Action Service, presented our own strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. This strategy sets out our intention to reinforce the European presence and action in the region based on inclusiveness and principled long-term engagement with regional partners. And here we as Europeans are not starting from scratch. Rather, we can build on a broad network of political partners and agreements with a number of countries such as Japan, the Republic of Korea, Australia, India, Singapore, and of course, New Zealand. This new orientation is strategically logical. After all, we in Europe have a serious stake in this region. What happens here will ultimately echo in Europe. If the European Union wants to genuinely reinforce its political presence in the Indo-Pacific, we need to do so based on a shared geopolitical vision for the region, while simultaneously upscaling security and defense coordination. A resolution adopted by the European Parliament in 2022 specifically reflects on the way in which the European Union should protect our interests and strengthen our bilateral ties to selected partners like the countries I just mentioned, New Zealand, Australia, the Republic of Korea, and Japan. With Japan, for example, the EU already signed a strategic partnership agreement in 2018, allowing for much closer security coordination, dialogue, and information exchange. One concrete example, what does that mean? European participation in the monitoring of United Nations Security Council sanctions coordinated from a base in Japan has been a bright spot ever since. Over the last 4 years, ships and surveillance aircrafts from France, the UK, and Germany have joined like-minded partners from navies of Japan, the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Korea in the waters and airspace around the Korean Peninsula to collect information under the guidance of a coordinated mechanism called the Enforcement Coordination Cell, based in Yokosuka in Japan. While engaging in multilateral formats of cooperation, the European Union is simultaneously faced with the increasing relevance and of exclusive minilateral formats of cooperation, which often center around the United States or China. The Quad, the strategic security dialogue between Australia, India, Japan, and the US, bears witness to this trend. It has been growing in importance with the expansion to new domains of cooperation, health governance and crisis management, resilience of supply chains, climate change, critical technologies, as well as new partners. A so-called Quad Plus dialogue was set up in March 2022 with South Korea, Vietnam, and New Zealand. Another relevant initiative is the US proposed Blue Pacific initiative, gathering Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and the UK to assist the promotion of Pacific regionalism. Here again, I believe the European Union could step up its contributions once the nature of this initiative is strengthened. And last not but least, I see potential for further exploring cooperation on the European naval presence in the entire Indo-Pacific. To be sure, the European Union strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific accentuates the need for more naval exercises and port calls. However, to the extent that we can currently claim to hold any naval power in the region, we do so on the back of the French, the German or Dutch navies, though France has traditionally played, of course, a much more significant role than Germany. Without reinforced naval capabilities, the EU will face difficulties in extending our political presence in the Indo-Pacific. We are, however, not starting from scratch. By launching the coordinated maritime presences in the northwestern Indian Ocean in February 2022, the European Union has already established a maritime area of interest extending from the Strait of Hormuz to Somalia and from the north of the Red Sea towards the center of the Indian Ocean. The coordinated maritime presence provides the EU with a flexible tool through the European Union and partner navies can share maritime information. It may be worth extending the concept further into Southeast and Northeast Asia. The same rationale could be applied to Operation Atalanta. In 2008, it was the first ever naval operation of the European Union with the dedicated object of protecting vessels of the World Food Programme. To date, it has become a successful counter-piracy operation whose mandate is persistently being extended. Widening its geographical scope would enable the European Union, first, to anchor in more formal means of maritime cooperation with core partners such as New Zealand, Japan, Australia, South Korea, the United Kingdom, and the United States. It would enable the EU to thus play a substantive role with regard to UN resolutions on North Korea, as well as to stand up for the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. One thing is clear, the European Union cannot and will not allow international law to be subverted by individual countries. After all, we have a serious stake in maritime security and the open access to sea lines of communication, if only for the fact that essential trade routes run through the Indo-Pacific. This leads me to the second dimension of our engagement, our trading relationship with partners in the Pacific. As mentioned, Prime Minister Hipkins and EU Commission President von der Leyen finally signed the trade agreement just 2 weeks ago in Brussels. It guarantees legal certainty, incentives, investment, and promises tangible benefits of around 140 million from tariff reductions already in the first year the agreement is applied. According to the same calculations, the joint agreement has the potential of boosting bilateral trade by 30%, thus increasing to 11.7 billion euros annually. I just had the opportunity to discuss these matters with your Trade Minister, Damien O'Connor. What we agreed was this agreement is particularly unique because of its chapter on sustainability. For the first time, an EU free trade agreement explicitly puts the sustainable development of bilateral trade center stage. Notably, the agreement stipulates compliance with the Paris Climate Agreement and the core standards of the International Labour Organization. It also ensures that violations of the agreed sustainability regulations can be sanctioned. Together, New Zealand and the European Union have set a positive example and laid an important foundation for fair, rules-based and sustainable trade amidst, as I mentioned, in an increasingly protectionist world. This agreement will now be put to vote in the European Parliament. Here we will exercise our right to parliamentary scrutiny like we do with every trade agreement. We have the last say, and we are very aware of this. But I'm very sure that the European Parliament will give our consent before the end of the year so that the agreement can enter into force in the first half of 2024. And by the way, the European elections will take place from the 6th to the 9th of June. Parliament will close down in April, and we certainly want to get it done before silly season begins. However, New Zealand is not the only country in which we entertain an ambitious trading agenda. Let me just say a few words on the status of the negotiations with Australia. Trade talks started first in 2018. Since then, 16 rounds of negotiations have already taken place, the most recent one just last month. Our European Trade Commissioner, Valdis Dombrovskis, has emphasized his intention to finalize the agreement in the margins of the NATO summit in Lithuania on the 11th and 12th of July. Well, both Australia and New Zealand were represented in Vilnius, but unfortunately the negotiations with the Australians were not brought to a close. A wise trade expert once said that in the end, EU trade agreements always come down to cars and cows. Well, with Australia, it's indeed the cows, as question marks remain over how much beef and lamb from Australia should enter the EU tariff-free. Despite outstanding disagreements, neither side is throwing in the towel. That's the good news. Australia's Trade Minister Don Farrell and EU Trade Chief Valdis Dombrovskis will meet again in August, with both also set to attend the G20 Trade Ministers meeting in India. I am strongly in favour of getting this agreement done. For both sides, the deal makes economic and geopolitical sense. We both have strong economic links to China, a vital global player that is increasingly engaging in coercive economic actions. While decoupling from China entirely is not a viable option, we should, however, attempt to de-risk our respective dependencies on the People's Republic that could leave us open to internal division and or enforced concessions. And finally, having said that the importance of the EU-Pacific collaboration reaches well beyond trade, though meaningful trade does contribute to the third and last common objective, I want to touch upon our joint ambition of reducing poverty and advancing both economic and human development. Our cooperation is crucial to implementing the international community's global agenda, including to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Over the years, the European Union has consistently made significant contributions in the entire Pacific in terms of development cooperation and humanitarian assistance, tackling biodiversity loss, pollution, and the multidimensional consequences of climate change. Indeed, 12 of the countries most exposed to the direct consequences of climate change lie in the Pacific. We in Europe appreciate both New Zealand's as well as Australia's strong commitment to an ambitious climate action. You have most recently received enormous praise at the NATO summit in Vilnius, where heads of state and government, including those of the Asia-Pacific 4 partners, discussed the NATO alliance approach to climate security. An ambitious climate policy cannot only be a domestic issue, it is a matter of a foreign security and defence policy as well. The European Union also has recognised the urgency of the crisis and is upscaling adaptation as well as mitigation efforts. Here, I believe we could deepen exchanges between our respective governments as well as between the private sector across a broad spectrum of issues such as climate change and disaster risk reduction, and taking on board the voices within and of the Pacific Island Forum, because for them, rising sea levels represent an existential threat to statehood. In this respect, my home country, Germany, is a strong contributor, has been and will continue to do so. With a value of 25 million euros, Germany's Insure Resilience Global Partnership Initiative has been offering climate risk insurance to Pacific Island states against tropical cyclones, earthquakes and tsunamis since 2016. In parallel, another program is funding the design of early warning systems with 18 million euros in Fiji as well as in Tonga. Whether it be investment in health, climate, resilient infrastructure or green energy, the European Union is the biggest donor for international development support in the world, providing over 50 billion euros a year to help overcome poverty and advance economic and human development. Under the current instruments, which finances the European Union's development cooperation, 600 million euros are specifically dedicated to the Pacific Islands between 2021 and 2027. A similar volume of assistance was committed to the Pacific already in the last term from 2014 to 2020, bringing the total commitment of us Europeans to the Pacific since 2014 to at least 1.5 billion euros. Equally, the Pacific is well captured in the orientation of the European Union's Global Gateway Initiative, a global gateway infrastructure initiative which European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen launched in December 2021. Essentially, the idea is for the European Commission, for our member states and the private sector to join forces as Team Europe in order to mobilize 300 billion euro worth of funds until 2027 to fill at least part of the worldwide infrastructure financing gap. We want to make better offers than the Chinese through their Belt and Road Initiative, transparently, at eye level, and without debt traps. Unfortunately, the European Union's action in the Pacific, and not only here, while very real, lacks visibility and readability. More than a third of our funds are channeled through multilateral organizations and still require overly complex bureaucratic procedures. Here we have to do better, and we have to definitely raise the visibility of our engagement. We are committed to consolidating and simplifying the funding we provide for greater efficiency, visibility and flexibility. Positions on development issues in regional and international fora could be further enhanced. So, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, a peaceful, a stable and rules-based Indo-Pacific is a vital European interest. We know very well by now, whatever happens here is likely to have a pervasive impact on the structure and the future of the international order and the norms and the institutions we Europeans hold so dear. That is precisely why the challenges to stability in the region call for an intensified security and defense coordination in cooperation and in combination with improved trade relations and development assistance. These were the thoughts I wanted to share with you on important aspects of defense and security, trade and development. Once again, I'm delighted to be here in New Zealand, and we know exactly what an important partner you are for us, and I have the impression that you will have much more high-level visits in the next years to come than it might have been in the last years and decades. And once again, wholeheartedly let me thank New Zealand for the great support you're giving to Ukraine. Because while we are sitting here and people are enjoying a football match at the Women's World Cup, let's not forget, brave women and men will also be killed today by a brutal Russian military invasion. Thank you.